Okay, we are live.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome you to the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Tim Ormond, and I am serving as chair. This is our May 17th, 2023 meeting. All committee members and staff are participating virtually. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website and also linked on the committee page. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. The public had an opportunity to provide public comment via email or voicemail. Any comments submitted have been provided to committee members and will be linked in the meeting minutes. We also have an option for the public to provide live public comment over the phone through the phone number listed on the engagement hub, which is linked on the committee webpage. On today's agenda, there will be an opportunity to provide public comment at the end of the meeting. For those of you out there with us, our many adoring fans in the metaverse, welcome. I would now like to go through and introduce all committee members who are participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphone if you are not speaking. When you have a question or would like to speak, use the raise hand button or unmute your microphone. Please remember to mute your phone after you're done speaking. Committee members, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Kim Austin.
Hello, everyone.
Alicia Goldstein.
Hello.
Joel Osgood.
Hello.
Michael Totten.
Everyone.
Vice Chair Steve Barron.
Hi.
Ashley Case.
Hello.
And Sophie Mullinax.
Good afternoon.
All right. I don't think we have our City Council liaison, Maggie Ullman, with us yet, but we do have our wonderful staff members from the Sustainability Office, Bridget Herring.
Good afternoon.
And Kiara Boulan.
Hi, everybody.
And does Nicole still work with you all, or is that?
She does not. You didn't
Okay.
read your memo, Tim.
Well, I read it, but I don't think it named her by name. I knew there was an opening, but anyway, guilty. Okay. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud and do a vocal roll call for each vote. Additionally, I ask that committee members raise their hand to speak, and I will call upon them. So our first agenda item is approval of the March minutes, and hope everyone has had a chance to review them. Are there any comments on these minutes? They are short and sweet. And if there are no comments, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the March minutes.
Thank you, Joel. And do we have a second?
Sophie.
All right. Thank you. So now I guess we go through and take a roll call vote. Is that correct? I should know all this. So if you decide to approve the minutes, I'd ask you to say aye after I call your name. And if you choose not to, then say nay. So Kim Austin.
Aye.
Alicia Goldstein.
Aye.
Joel Osgood.
Sorry, I was trying to get the mute. Aye.
Michael Totten.
Aye.
Steve Barron.
Aye.
Ashley Case.
Aye.
Sophie Mullinax.
Aye.
And I also am an aye. The ayes have it. The meeting minutes are approved. Thank you, everybody. So now we will go into our updates. We'll start with our working group update. And our first one is the Energy and Carbon Working Group, and Sophie Mullinax is going to update us. Take it away, Sophie.
Yeah, hi. Give me a second to pull up some notes that I wanted to share. So the Energy and Carbon Working Group doesn't have any Energy and Carbon Working Group updates, but I did want to share some information and an update from the Missing Middle Housing Advisory Committee, of which I am the SAC representative. This committee had its first meeting on April 26th, and it was followed by a Building Our City speaker series presentation. So the advisory committee is made up of a pretty broad swath of the community, including lots of builders and architects and people in the sustainability field and community members. And just looking at the presentation, just thinking about how I can serve on this committee and represent a sustainability mindset and perspective. I'll be sharing updates with you all as often as possible. But I'd love to get your thoughts on what perspectives or issues I could bring up at the meetings. There's 2 more advisory meetings, and we'll be looking at, there's a consulting firm that is looking at barriers to missing middle housing in Asheville. And defining missing middle housing, I should have started with that, I'm sorry. They are house scale buildings with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods. So you have single family detached houses on one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end you have large sort of mid-rise apartment buildings and beyond. The missing middle is anything from a duplex to triplex, fourplex, courtyard apartments, cottage courts, multiplexes, live work situations, and that is what we, I guess, have a dearth of in Asheville. So Opticos Design is the consulting firm that the city has contracted with to perform this missing middle housing study. And they are going to be looking at the barriers to missing middle housing, as well as leading this advisory group to ensure that the community's input is taken into account and listened to along the way. At our first meeting, we all introduced each other and talked about where we live in Asheville, who we're representing. I think it's a really great group. I saw a lot of familiar faces, having done some work with the city and the county in the community engagement space. It felt nice to be in a room with people who are caring about this type of stuff. But missing middle housing, I think, can be a solution to the affordable housing crisis that Asheville and so many other cities around the country are facing right now. And my understanding of it, the term missing middle housing is actually new to me, and I think it was only coined just about 10 or 15 years ago. But my understanding of it is it could potentially increase density while not increasing lot size. And just an example is thinking about where I live in West Asheville. I live near Paul Fletcher Elementary School. On my street, there are actually some quadplexes and triplexes and duplexes, but they blend in really well with the neighborhood. It's a single family neighborhood of mostly older workforce housing with, some renovations flipping happening as is happening all over the city. But the idea is to not have a giant apartment building or, mixed use retail right smack dab in the middle of a single family neighborhood. It's designed to blend in and use existing lot sizes and match the scale, design and architecture of the neighborhood where missing middle housing is going. So that's kind of the summary of our first meeting. Learned a lot about other cities that have been studying this and some results. You may also know that I do some volunteer work with the Tree Protection Task Force with Asheville Greenworks. So that's another perspective I'm trying to keep at the forefront of my mind. Anytime you develop on a lot, trees will be impacted, and it's possible that missing middle housing could impact tree canopy even more than single family development. So just keeping, ear to the ground, eyes open about how to balance, so many different competing needs in terms of sustainability and affordable housing and tree canopy protection and walkability and multimodal transit and, all the things that make a really good, livable, workable city in this whole process. So I'll stop there, but I'm happy to entertain a discussion or some questions.
Thanks, Sophie. Steve has a question.
Yes, I do. All right. Sounds like you feel strongly both ways starting out, Sophie.
Both ways
The
being
tree-
what?
The tree protection issue and the as a downside. But my what I wanted to say is that I took a quick look at the site and I was struck by, if I'm correct, seeing that 2/3 of all the neighborhoods in our city only allow single-family homes. And so I guess, am I correct that one of the possible things the study will be considering would be whether to recommend some kind of relaxation or change in those zoning restrictions to allow for duplexes, townhomes, the kind of missing middle thing. Since I guess currently in 2/3 of the areas, they're just not allowed. I guess the other thing I thought about when I was thinking about this briefly is that, just like with anything, housing there's supply and demand, and there are lots of questions of affordability and with changing demographics, who wants to live in a duplex versus having a single, a separate home versus apartments, all that. And I guess all I'm doing is coming to the conclusion that there is no conclusion. It's going to be very difficult to be balancing a lot of these factors. And does the group have a sense of where this is headed, or is it is there kind of this implicit it's missing and therefore we need to find some of it and encourage some of it, or is it just kind of let's take a look at all the factors and see where we are and what might be best?
I think it's all the above. The U.S. historically has built missing middle housing. It's just not really built today. And you mentioned shifting demographics. Today, 30% of U.S. households are single persons. By 2025, in just 18 months, 75 to 85% of American households won't have children. And by 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. And so missing middle housing, could very well fit the needs of our changing demographics in terms of being smaller units in more walkable neighborhoods with, I don't know how to say like more of a sense of community, but, inherently fostering more of a community with neighbors. And I listened to this really great podcast on loneliness and elderly folks. It was the Ezra Klein show. If anybody listens to that, it was one of the most recent ones. And that is a very scary and sad epidemic, loneliness in our aging populations. So I see missing middle. My eyes have been open to missing middle being a solution for, a lot of things. And you know how I feel about multi-solving.
Good. Thanks for that discussion. And Ashley also has a question.
Yeah, I just want to say, Sophie, I think that's awesome that you're doing it. Sounds like your group is really focused on smart growth and like walkable neighborhoods already. One of the areas that I've spent some time reading about and researching is like urban growth boundaries, and how Portland, Oregon was like one of the ones to kind of kickstart that. What in putting an urban growth boundary in, it focuses the development to be pretty much all smart within the city limits. And I was just wondering if that's on the table or it's been discussed in your group at all. And also, I've heard a rumor that urban growth boundaries are illegal in North Carolina, like most good and sustainable things. But I don't know if that's true also.
That term has not been brought up. I can bring it up, and maybe, one of our other folks on the call know if it's not allowed or not. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not, as you said. But no, one of the driving, I think, motivations behind this too is infill development and reducing sprawl, which, there's many sides and pluses and minuses to infill development, as well as, the more suburban sprawl that we see. And I feel, most of the city folks that I've interacted with through this advisory committee and the Building Our City presentation after the committee met, feel really strongly about not having Asheville become this really sprawling town where you have to be very car dependent and you're isolated from your community, your job, your, areas, your daily destinations. Other things that the study Opticos is going to be looking at are like a very close examination of different types of barriers, policy barriers, zoning in particular, as well as doing a displacement assessment and analyzing different neighborhoods around the city for their displacement vulnerability, meaning if more missing middle housing is built in this neighborhood, what is the vulnerability of those existing residents for being displaced, which we all know is a very serious issue. But I find the whole thing really fascinating. I'm learning a lot. I'm really happy to be participating in it. And I'll continue to share more. I see other people have their hands raised, though, so let's continue if we have the time.
Yeah, let's go with Michael, then followed by Councilwoman Allman.
Thank you, Sophie. That was is an excellent informative overview. Thank you so much. The only question, sorry?
Go ahead.
The only question I had, will they be looking at this report of all electric buildings so that they save on avoiding gas hookups and also roof lines that are solar capable?
We haven't gotten that far yet. The all electric piece in particular is one that I plan to bring up. I don't know what power we have to mandate that or incentivize it. But I'm with you, Michael, on both of those.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Good. Well, if they need any information, I've been immersed in this for some years now. I'm happy to provide any information.
Cool.
Great. And welcome, Councilwoman Allman. Your turn.
Hey, sorry to be late, everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in because I'm very excited about this. I think that this missing middle study, coupled with the pending financial commitment that we hope will come through to do an urban forestry master plan, with some other things that relate to how we grow, where we grow, when we grow, what sprawl we can resist, all this type of stuff, I think is going to move us in the right direction to have the nuance and like scalpel strategies that are necessary, because saying infill anywhere isn't going to work. Saying never cut a tree anywhere also isn't going to work. And so the fact that we can have this be kind of moving in a similar direction on a similar timeline allows us to, I hope, be a lot more strategic about how we manage the growth instead of sitting on our hands and having it come our way. And so I'm enthusiastic about that. And just one other 2 cents to Michael's comment. My sense is that this missing middle study likely won't address things around building capabilities for electrification or renewables. I think it's really going to be a lot more focused on zoning, which typically doesn't address the building itself. And I think that there are growing conversations that having advocate support, like folks from SACE in the community, to talk about us really looking at our unified development ordinance at large is important. I also think looking at the existing development incentives we already have and how they could be incentivizing greening are two places where I think the conversation you brought up, Michael, of where can we be really pushing for renewables and electrification, those are two of the sources I think that we might see the most opportunity. So there's my 2 cents. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that great discussion and update. Sophie, please keep us posted. And as a middle child myself, I have a strong interest in this topic. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ashley for our resilience group update.
Hi, everybody. So our Resilience Working Group met last month, and we had the pleasure of having Jeremy Knightington. Did I say his name correctly?
Knightington.
He's the captain of Asheville's fire department, and he also does division of emergency management. And he showed us a presentation that you all will actually see as well on the emergency operation plan and the continuing the operations plan. So the EOP and the COOP, or he was referring to it as COOP. And so both of these plans, they both sound like they're still in the development phase and still getting a lot of community engagement and trying to engage stakeholders as well. And both of the plans will support and work with existing departmental plans, initiatives like the Climate Justice Initiative and the Water Resource Emergency Response Plan. And so he was also really talking to us about the surveys and that he's trying to get out there, and hopefully we can help get the surveys out there for him. I did this survey actually today, and there was about 150 people or so had taken the survey. So they definitely need more input. And the survey really just focuses on like what community members have dealt with in terms of emergency kind of hazardous times. Also what people are most concerned about and what areas they need to focus on mostly. And then he also discussed how Asheville City departments are able to help people feel more prepared for extreme weather events or water outages. And he's talking about like having workshops or handing out preparedness safety kits, or even just checklists. Like even if you already have a lot of the stuff, but you don't necessarily know what needs to be in your kit. So having that checklist available. And he was also talking about doing maybe some, or in the presentation, it was talking about doing like pop-ups for tent events or just to help inform the public. So the other thing that he mentioned, which is good to know, if you don't have a landline, so if you have an Asheville landline, then you get phone calls about anything, whether it's an outage or a big hazardous event, I suppose. But if you don't have a landline, you can sign up for Asheville Alerts, and it's opt into AVL to sign up for Asheville Alerts. And I think it kind of covers everything, but mostly it focuses on hazardous times, not hazardous times, but hazardous events, or like the loss of water or power and things.
Outages and core services of some kind that you might be impacted by.
Yes, those were the words I was looking for. Thank you.
Great. We'll have some questions. Michael?
Ashley, do they look at railroad cargo that may pose hazardous conditions? Does Asheville have anything that goes through it like that?
That's a great question. And he didn't specifically talk about that. And that was not one of the, on the survey, I'm not remembering that specifically as one of the things that you could check. Now there might have been, I don't even think like chemical spill or anything like that was an option for checking things that you were concerned with. So that'd be a good thing to bring up as it's been more widely discussed recently with the spills that have happened around the U.S.
Great, thank you.
All right. If there are no further questions, comments here, we'll move it right along and turn it over to Joel, who's going to give us our SWWG, also known as SWAG, also known as SWIG, Stormwater and Green Infrastructure Working Group update. Take it away, Joel.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. I love all the acronyms we got flying around here. So we last met on, I believe it was Tuesday, March 21st. In our combined meeting, we reviewed and discussed the SWTF, which is the Stormwater Task Force report. We had a good, substantial discussion around the approaches and progress that the city has made related to various aspects of open space, green infrastructure, green roofs, stormwater alternatives, etc. We also had a good review session with Mr. Vidila Saptika from Urban Planning, and he presented some updates to landscape code that they're working through related to canopy and tree sort of soil and I guess area for good root structure updates, which is near and dear as a landscape architect and very appreciative of that. Also some good conversations around green roofs and how to move forward with more implementation of green roofs and sort of maintenance of roofs around the city of Asheville. And I believe the next step, that was all leveraging towards also a review of a stormwater fee study. And I believe our next meeting may focus on that. And while we had a meeting scheduled for earlier this week, that was postponed until a later date. So that is my quick update. But yeah, happy to fill in any gaps, or certainly feel free, Alicia or Tim, if I have left any gaps there.
Thank you, Joel. I think that was pretty thorough. We expect we'll have more to report very soon. And if there are no questions, we'll turn it over to Bridget for the Sustainability Department update.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bridget Herring, the Sustainability Director, and I just wanted to put together a memo that just summarizes some of the happenings that have been going on in the department that aren't really on this agenda, just to keep you all in the loop. So the survey to inform the continuity of operations plan and the emergency operations plan. And that project page is linked into this memo. So anybody in the community that's watching this, as well as SACE members that would like to participate in this, please click on that link and find some more information. I know that you all are aware that we lost Chris. He resigned. He had some stuff going on and didn't have the time to keep up with this commitment. And so while we will miss him, we had advertised for that position. We've received some applications, and council will be considering that at their June meeting. So pending their approval of one of those applications, in case they, or if they choose to re-advertise, we anticipate that there'll be a new member on the committee for your next meeting in July. I'm excited to report that the Municipal Climate Action Plan was unanimously adopted by council. So included in the blog post for that. Very exciting. And thank you all again for your hard work on that initiative, and excited to start thinking about shifting into implementation. We had the food scraps drop-off program. The city council approved an interlocal agreement with Buncombe County to kind of co-manage that program. So we're happy to see kind of a formalized partnership with that, so we can see that program grow and expand, since it's been so popular, and we're excited to see more action happening with expanding opportunities for compost besides the backyard option. So not everybody has that. And then mentioned that the sustainability coordinator position became vacant at the end of March. So we reposted that position. It closed on May 7th. So we're currently reviewing applications and hoping to schedule interviews pretty quickly. So that's just a little snapshot of the day-to-day in the sustainability department. Steve?
Yeah, I wanted to share my excitement at the addition of 2 new locations for food scraps drop-off. One that's very convenient to me And since we last met, I've even dug a big hole in my backyard. So I've got it going all the way around. So I'm enthusiastic, albeit a novice on composting. I've been kind of looking at this because I'm so interested in it. I wanted to share some observations with you for discussion. This expansion of the drop-offs is really great. And I think the numbers are 160 tons of food waste have been diverted from the landfill to date. That's 2.5 years. And then it's anticipated, and Kira or Bridget will correct me, that going forward with the expanded sites, that we may be looking at something like 225 tons avoided annually, which is a significant increase. At the same time, I want to observe that 225 tons annually avoided really is only a drop in the food scraps bucket. The numbers that I have come across, if they're accurate, is that each year we have an estimated in excess of 57,000 tons of food that's wasted in Buncombe County, and that takes up fully a quarter of our landfill requirements. And so I think it would be really important and great if we could somehow work on developing kind of a going forward way to scale up, find ways to scale up, really scale up the kind of diversion, food scraps diversion and composting. We did get a public comment a couple weeks ago that Tim and Bridget have responded to, that suggested that curbside pickup is the way to go. Avoids driving to the, greenhouse gas emissions, avoids driving there, and suggested that the county landfill might be a place to increase composting capacity. Easily said, I'm sure, but something worth looking into. The comment noted that New York City and Boulder, Colorado, both have curbside. I took a look. New York City has both drop-off and curbside, and curbside isn't complete. It's expanding to different boroughs. Boulder does not do it, but the city of Boulder does not do it. They have, there are like 6, I think half a dozen, something like 6 private companies that will do curbside pickup for you. And we have one, right? Compost AVL. I don't know much about them, but that is one option that we currently have. And there are others that I looked at, like my old hometown, the city of Austin, has, since I've left in the last 3 or 4 years, they have curbside pickup with your separate food scrap container, and you can choose a downsized regular landfill trash container to save money from doing that diversion. So that's an incentive. Charlotte has something private, I think, and the like. But I just think that there's such good potential benefits. I would hope we would find low-hanging fruit from doing this, not just avoiding landfill, but reducing methane emissions, right? And obviously reducing the amount of food that's wasted, because at least for me, food waste, it's increased food waste consciousness when you have to throw your food away in a special place. And of course, there's the garden soil that comes out at the end of all this. So I would like to see at some point the consideration of some kind of study to kind of explore and quantify the benefits and costs of different options. The kinds of issues that you think about. One, do we have composting facilities enough? How much would be cost to develop it? Curbside pickup, is that something the city could do? City by contract, RFPs could do? Is that something that should be left to private, but maybe encouraged in some way? I guess that's sort of where I am on this. I know the single-use plastic study kind of looked at the pros and cons what's feasible to do with plastic bags. And there was a 2015 study that Bridget shared, this pay as you throw study that kind of did a look back then at some options. So I think let's build on what we have and really see if we can get some big numbers up in the sometime in the future, if we can, if it makes sense. Thank you for bearing with me.
Thanks, Steve. Michael has a comment, question? Or a hand up? I don't know if you're still there, Michael. We can come back to you if you're.
No, sorry. I went through a blind spot there. I just want to align and affirm what Steve just said. I think that's great ideas. And that wasn't why I had my hand raised, but since he raised this, and I guess maybe other people comment, I'll wait to make my other question, raise my other question.
Okay. I don't know if Bridget has any response she'd like to share. I know she has probably the deepest history and knowledge on this in this group, maybe with the exception of Maggie, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it goes all the way back to when Councilwoman Ullman was in my position. So I think this is an issue the city has been looking at for a long time. There's some infrastructure challenges with being able to process that amount of compost that outsizes the current infrastructure that we have available. And actually, a previous iteration of the Sustainability Advisory Committee went on a field trip to tour Atlas Organics, which is in Spartanburg, South Carolina, which is the closest commercial composting facility that we currently have. But I think this drop-off program was a way to help us quantify the demand and the interest there is in compost. So there are a number of subscription-based services for people who want to take that curbside option now, but I think the drop-off helps demonstrate the demand and the potential for waste reduction diversion. Which is essential for the county to see and experience since they own and operate the landfill that we have out there. And also a reason why we put the solid waste master plan and the municipal climate action plan, which is also something that was presented as part of the city manager's budget to council that's under consideration for funding in this next year. So I know nothing seems like it happens fast enough, but trying to also help you see some of the steps that we've taken and that we're continuing to take to try and work towards expanding this opportunity to our residents.
If I could add in, I would love to see this happen. I'm trying to think of like how to be like polite or I don't know, like city council-ish, but like this has been a dream I've had for a really long time. And it's major infrastructure change and it's major service delivery change, but that's okay. We can keep working. It feels like one of those BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals, but it seems really worth it. I think the leadership Bridget has been exhibiting and the partnership that she and Jess Foster and our sanitation department continue to cultivate with the county's landfill are really moving this in the right direction. Because, you know, just because we have a drop-off site, it goes somewhere, right? And it goes to the landfill. And the landfill has basically started a pilot compost facility. It's tiny, but it's tiny by design because it's like as big as they can go without jumping into a regulatory threshold, right? So they took on as much as they could to test some functions and some operations before they would have to invest in like a lot of legal stuff. So it was very smart on their part, very smart on your part. I'll also say that I have the privilege of sitting on the county commission's environment and energy subcommittee. There's 3 commissioners and then a couple of us citizens are appointed. And so we talk about land solid waste a lot, and Dane, the head of the landfill, comes, and this is a conversation that is also being had there. So no one's like, let's do this yesterday, but it's more like, that landfill is going to fill up and our prices are going to skyrocket. And then we're going to be hauling our waste to South Carolina. Nobody wants that. So I I see nothing but really positive signals, but very slow and calculated signals, as I would want something with such major infrastructure. So that's just I was going to say 2 cents, but it's probably more like 16.
Thank you.
On the
Inflation.
if I may,
Oh, we have Alicia with her hand up, and then we'll circle back to you, Steve.
fine. Sorry.
I'll just quickly say, I think we can't have it all at once, and it's good to keep it in mind. And something to be said is, it's also, even if you had it at curbside, not everyone behaviorally will want to bring out their compost and separate it. And two, another issue, since I spent all yesterday with a bear in my backyard, is that if you do have it, something we need to consider, if you have curbside and people are bringing out their food scraps to a curbside recycling, what is that going to do for all of our wildlife in the area? And like, bringing bears to places. I mean, I know people take out their trash every night, but I don't know, something to consider when we make all these decisions of behavioral changes. Even if you provide it, not everyone wants to have 2 separate trash cans in their house and bring it out. So I think this is the drop offs, and doing it this way and seeing how many people use it and expanding the sites, I think is a good way to go now without a huge infrastructure investment and more specialized trucks and funding sites. So I just applaud the effort.
Thanks, Alicia. Steve?
Oh, why can't it happen yesterday? I just, what I meant to do really was just to raise the question of whether at some point it's worth doing a kind of a study to put numbers on. There are real costs, obviously, in this, and infrastructure costs and behavior questions, and there are real substantial benefits, as Councilman Ullman indicated. The landfill filling up, is an issue. Being able to sell garden soil at the end of the day is a possible benefit. Just is there a time at some point, and maybe it's not now, and maybe it's not for several years, I guess, but is there a point at which it's worth trying to take a hard look at what the numbers would be, both on the plus and minus side, to make a call on questions of how we can scale up? Because right now it's really very small. So, and I understand why and reasons why, but that was my thought. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. We should probably move on. I do know 18 years ago when I lived in San Francisco, they did have curbside compost pickup, I think citywide. So it's a much denser city, but it may be an example of a success story, or maybe not. But let's keep going. We're going to move into old business. And on our agenda, we have plastic reduction project update, sanitation analysis memo and presentation. Jess Foster, welcome.
Hey, thank you. So I'm here to talk today about single-use plastic waste management and an analysis that we did of the city's sanitation ability to capture and manage those plastic wastes that we're looking at. So Kira's going to run a slideshow for me. Is it ready? Is it good?
It's just slow. Our internet connection, I think, is a little slow.
There we go. Okay, there we are. So I'm ready, I think, for the next slide. I'm going to give an update on plastic waste management. Are you trying to move to the next slide? Is it just being slow? Okay. I'll be patient.
Sorry, y'all. My computer's being real slow. We'll see if we can get it to catch up with us.
I can also just talk if I need to.
Sorry, everybody. Connection drama. We're working on it.
Okay. I'm not sure we have an alternate agenda to go to, unless I'm assuming, Bridget, your public input survey sort of builds on what Jess is going to present, or?
There we go.
Oh, good.
Okay. So I'm going to start out with the key takeaways that I'm going to go over today. So today I'm going to show you some key data that demonstrates that our current municipal solid waste services are inadequate to properly capture and manage certain single-use plastic wastes. Changing or expanding our service operations to properly manage that waste are really not financially or operationally feasible. And the current local infrastructure outside of our municipal services to properly capture the waste, like the magnitude and the types of waste that we're targeting, that infrastructure is limited. So next slide. The next slide is just a background slide, so I'll just go ahead and say, as you know, council directed staff to look at strategies to reduce single-use plastic waste. And so we've implemented phase 1, which was changing that ordinance. And so we're now prohibiting plastic bags from yard waste collection effective August 1st. Now we're looking at point of sale plastic reduction, particularly for retail plastic bags and EPS food to go styrofoam. So Sustainability Office is doing all of the public input, engagement, surveys, all of that gathering. But we were also asked to look at our sanitation operations and analyze their ability to capture and properly manage plastic bags and EPS. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. Next slide. Dun, dun, dun. I'll just start talking and then it'll catch up. Okay, so first, our staff started by just gathering as much data and information as we could. So we got recycling contamination data from our material recovery facility, curbside management. We looked at roadside, river, and waterway litter data from our community partners who are out there picking up litter all the time. We looked at blown litter at Buncombe County disposal facilities. Buncombe County recently did a waste characterization study of stuff being landfilled, and so we were able to look at that data and see what's being landfilled. We looked at EPS recycling options as well as compost facility contamination. So in sort of looking at all of this data that we gathered, we did find some data that maybe more strongly pointed to the inadequacy of our current system to manage that waste. And so the data that we found that pointed to that was the volume and the type of litter that we're finding in our rivers and on roadways. Yeah, I'm still here. Thank you. So like since July, like Asheville Greenworks has picked up over 7 tons of litter from roadways, most of that being single use and a lot of it being plastic waste. And since 2017, over 5 tons of waste captured in their trash trouts that they've been building in the streams. And, you have to think about 5 tons of waste when it's like little plastic, lightweight bits. That's a lot of little lightweight bits of plastic. So there's also significant cost for staff, contractors, and volunteer time in managing plastic waste that escapes our system. So for example, Buncombe County pays over $20,000 a year and spends over 1,200 hours collecting windblown litter at their facilities, and that's mostly retail plastic bags. The city's paying contractors to pick up roadside litter right now. We're supporting Asheville Greenworks in their trash trouts and cleanups. All of that amounts to a significant financial and time investment. We were also able to get some good data from our recycling contractor on the cost of contamination. So Curbside Management, who processes the city's recyclables, they landfill 175 tons a month of waste that cannot be recycled. And that is plastic waste that cannot be recycled. And they spend around $90,000 a year disposing of that. They also have to pay folks. They spend about 540 to 630 hours a week simply picking bags off of the sorting line at their recovery facility. So they're able to identify plastic bags as a primary contaminant that impacts their operations. Okay, next slide. So we also looked at like why these particular materials are challenging. So the sort of just like wide distribution and lightweight nature of single-use plastic bags makes them really difficult to capture in our sanitation services. So, if you put a plastic bag in a trash can or in a street receptacle, it can just blow away very easily. And so they're just so hard to capture because they blow around. And they're so widespread that the recycling contamination rates are really high. I think it was estimated that if we were to prohibit plastic bags at the point of sale, we'd be able to eliminate over 63 million bags a year. So that widespread nature makes them very prolific out in the environment. Same for EPS. It's very lightweight, which results in it being able to be blown around, and it sort of crumbles into small pieces. But particularly, it's contaminated with food, which makes recyclability a challenge. Okay, next. So we did look at, what could we do to improve our services to properly manage this? So we're like, okay, what if we did dedicated curbside recycling for these materials? It would require just millions of dollars in investment to, start up, provide carts, have vehicles, have staff to provide a collection service just for those items. So that's not really feasible. And it would only capture residential waste because that's what the city provides service for. We thought, what if we did a drop-off system, right? Like similar to our food waste drop-off system. What if we had a drop-off system? Again, you're looking at extensive one-time startup costs, ongoing operational costs, having a facility to process the material. It becomes a very costly endeavor. And we do know that there are already some drop-off programs that exist for plastic bags. So it would be like duplicating those efforts. We did talk with Curbside Management. Is it possible for them to pull that material that they're getting in the recycling stream and market it as a recyclable? Can they recycle it? And the material is unfortunately just too contaminated once it gets to them to be sorted and marketed. So none of these options were really considered feasible for us. Next. So we looked at, there are some current other management solutions other than our sanitation services that are around right now. So those include, there's recycling for clean, dry plastic bags and film, and for clean, white EPS. There's currently one vendor accepting that clean white EPS. And so that doesn't necessarily include food contaminated EPS, which is what we're talking about here. And there may be 36, there's maybe 36 retailers within 30 miles of this area accepting plastic bags and film for recycling. But we would suggest that, the data on the presence of these single-use plastics in the landfill and in litter indicates that those options that we do have aren't functioning well enough to really handle the problem. I think the infrastructure needed to capture and process the scale that we're talking about is just really insufficient right now. Next. So that's our analysis on litter and plastic waste data. So for now, staff is just going to continue gathering input from residents, and then we'll make recommendations to council. Just wanted to note that the scope, strategy, and feasibility of any ordinance change will be determined by this analysis of our current service provision, the effects of the material on public health and the environment, and information received from public engagement. And any ordinance development and implementation is going to require financial resources and staff time, including resources for ongoing enforcement. And just to reiterate key findings again, so we think the data demonstrates that our current municipal sanitation services are inadequate to capture and properly manage these single-use plastic wastes. Changing our sanitation services to properly manage them is not feasible, and our current local infrastructure is limited to currently handle the magnitude of these types of waste that we have today. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. We'll open up for any questions or comments. Steve.
Yes, thank you. And I read the report, the memo also that was included in the materials that covered your ground in a little more detail, perhaps. All very interesting. I have two questions, or related questions. One is, what do we know? I didn't see it, but I may have missed it. What is the city's current capacity to do plastic? If you get clean plastic bags, what is the capacity to recycle those? The second question I have is, apart from capacity, the challenge that you identified about adapting current curbside recycling processes is that the bags are likely to be contaminated if they're included in the current curbside recycling carts. And the thought occurred to me, would it be possible to nonetheless to have them picked up but segregated? I have to ask me as a resident to, when I get all my bags, plastic bags, I have reusables. But when I pick up all my plastic bags and collect them for the week, I try to reuse them. But if I don't, just put them in a larger kitchen trash bag and have them put out at the same time for brush collection, or for everybody's going to do, or for your biweekly recycling, so that they're segregated and not contaminated and clean, to supplement the dropping it off at Ingalls or Harris Teeter or whatever. Is there potential there? So sorry, those two questions, capacity and that is an option to keep it clean.
I'll start with the second piece. So the first alternative management solution that we looked at was providing separate recycling services just for those items. And so when you're talking about, segregating it and then having a whole separate collection route for it, we're talking how else would it be collected?
Well, when the brush people, when recycling comes by, the guy came by today, our house, right? Mm-hmm. He took all the cardboard and all, et cetera, and did it. If I had alongside it all the plastic bags that I get when I check out segregated in a white kitchen plastic bag, if there's a place to keep it separate in the truck, I know that could be an issue, but that would keep clean plastic bags and make them accessible without having to do new routes or just be incorporated as another item to pick up, separate and kept clean. That was the idea that
gotcha.
Maybe I didn't.
So I mean, we can revisit that question with our MRF, but they did indicate that. I mean, because their trucks are they're compacting, and there's glass and stuff. That the material is too contaminated, and also the vendor that recycles the material that they would sell it to they state that they don't want to take materials from curbside collection. So they're looking for clean, they want it to be super clean and dry, and their specs are pretty rigid, but we can always go back and ask that specific scenario that you mentioned. As far as what is the city's capacity to collect or process, there's not a recycling processor here, right? So there's there's a private recycling company, like Trex, for example, is the largest one. And so what happens now is retailers, they collect, it goes back to their distribution warehouses for their individual businesses, and then they sell, they market it to Trex. And so I think that private system is going, I don't think the city can do anything that would match that.
Yeah, I guess my question is, this per Trex, what's their capacity? Could they, in theory, if you could get additional, a huge, increase in the number of clean plastic bags, do they have the capacity to process those, or is it just limited? Yeah.
Okay. We can find out what their capacity is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ashley has a question.
I was just curious if Trex company is the same company that makes Trex decking boards. Is that okay? Cool. Thank you.
All right. Now we know. Thank you again, Jess. It was a great, informative presentation. Appreciate your willingness to share it and to answer questions. With that, we'll keep moving, and Bridget has some survey results to share.
Thank you. And this is, and thanks, Jess, for coming to present to us. Anytime we consider an ordinance that would impact the entire city, it's going to touch multiple departments, and sanitation is just one of those key partners that would be involved if the city was to take on this initiative. So I'm going to share some updates from the plastic engagement. So some key takeaways that I want to leave you with today is that there's definitely a high level of interest in this issue, particularly from residents that participated in the survey, but we still have some missing voices, particularly from the business community, where I feel like participation was too low for us really to draw any conclusions from that input. And so we need to look at, now that we have some data and we have some gaps, we can start to focus in on getting some input from those missing voices and make some different strategies, because we know a survey is not a one size fits all or the only tool that we have to engage with folks that do business and live here. So just an overview of what we did. The survey, it's still online, but we promoted it in being open as March 20th to June 30th. And in that time, we received 6,850 responses. So that's pretty high for a city survey. So definitely a lot of interest, but primarily those were from residents. But the survey was designed to be for both residents and businesses, brick and mortar businesses in particular. Folks had the opportunity to answer the survey from both perspectives, if that resonated with them, or just one or the other, which made it, I guess, a little confusing. Also, choose your own adventure. So there's some pros and cons to that approach. We built the survey questions off of the initial engagement effort and surveying that was done by Plastic Free WNC. Then also from the internal surveying and polling that we did with city staff. And then we reviewed the draft survey with a number of different interest groups. So one was the Sustainability Advisory Committee in coordination with the Neighborhood Advisory Committee. So that was great cross board collaboration that I love to see. So thank you all for helping to facilitate and make that happen. We also reviewed the questions with some representatives from Go Local and the Asheville Independent Restaurants, as well as Plastic Free WNC before we finalized those questions. The surveys were available in English, Spanish, and Russian, and we had paper surveys that were available at recreation centers by request. We also did collaborations with Mountain True and the Buncombe County Communications and Engagement Team that also took paper surveys out into the community. So here is a snapshot of some of our outreach efforts. I'm not going to read through them all, but we did try to leverage partnerships, as I mentioned, with Plastic Free WNC, with Buncombe County, with our neighborhood services team, with our community and economic development team, and leverage some of our local media and social media as well to try and get the word out about this. So some reflections on who were the folks that were answering our survey. This gives you a little snapshot of household salary that people reported and our race demographics. So what we do when we get the demographic information, which every question on this survey was optional. So I do have to caveat with that. We don't have 6,850 responses to every single question, including demographics. So there is that. But what we do is we take a look at the demographics and we compare the percentages to what the census data says we have to see if we're representative in that percentage category that's reflective of our population. So we saw not as many folks in the low to moderate income bracket that were represented in terms of our percentage of populations according to census, as well as people of color. That percentage was also lower than census data. We also added for zip codes. So this just kind of gives you a spread of where people live in the city that answered the survey. And again, about 72% were homeowners. And so that's another area that we can look at census data to say is a little high. We're underrepresented by renters in this survey. And we have 92% saying their primary mode of transportation is a car. And I actually checked in with our transit department, and I don't think we have local numbers for that, but in terms of the national standard, that actually does sync up. So we actually do meet kind of that national percentage of who's relying on transit. So a little bit more about the actual responses themselves. So if you took the survey, which I hope you did, there were some questions in the beginning that were the same, and then it kind of spread out into the resident or the business perspective. So this is a snapshot of kind of those top tier questions that everybody filled out, regardless if you wanted to fill it out as a business owner or a resident. So it was overwhelmingly that plastic litter is a problem. You know, the most commonly seen plastic litter that was reported in order from most to least was plastic bags, plastic bottles, and expanded polystyrene, or more commonly known as styrofoam disposable foodware products. The three most common places that people were seeing litter in their neighborhoods that they reported was roadways, waterways, and storm drains. So all of those had over 50% as reported for places to see litter. And then the number one, the only compliance, I think the only compliance activity that got over 50%, but the number one at least that would support compliance was a bag program. So I thought those were interesting. So then going specifically down into just the resident portion of the survey, we see a high level of support for folks on banning both plastic bags and expanded polystyrene. But we're also talking to people who are already kind of the converted, right? So most of the folks that responded say they often or always use their own bags. So these aren't people that, and they all said, low to medium impact on their lives. So not folks that, would this change be enacted, that there would be a lot of change required on their part from their day to day. So I think that's something that we have to take into consideration as we're looking at who are those missing voices still. The source, which I think is helpful for us in helping to target our next phase of business outreach of like where these products come from in people's lives, was primarily grocery stores at 60%. And then I think restaurants came in at 22%, and then everything else was like below 10%. And so I think that helps us really focus on restaurants and grocers as we look at this next phase of engagement with the business community. And then also, interestingly enough, only 39% reported recycling their plastic bags. So as Jess was just talking about, the number of distribution places, or I guess not distribution, collection places that you can take your plastic bags to be recycled. Most people, or not the majority of people who responded to the survey, are utilizing that option. Most people did say they use them for something else. They repurpose them in some other way before they go into the waste stream. But did think that was interesting in terms of like the demand for actually recycling these products. So again, as I mentioned, the business participation was a lot lower than we had hoped, and we had got no participation from grocers. And most of the businesses that participated don't utilize these products in their business. So there's no impact there. Because we ask questions about impact on your business. We ask questions about what products you offer. And that could not just be a plastic bag, but that could also be a paper bag or a compostable bag or some other alternative for like carrying things, right? So we weren't just looking at who's using the products that might, be impacted, but also people who are already ahead of the curve and using something that would be compliant under a new policy. And not a lot of those people participated in this form of engagement. So the next steps that we have in front of us are to look at strategies that are going to get increased engagement from those missing voices. So impacted businesses, missing resident voices, and those folks out there that aren't utilizing this in their day-to-day that would be surprised or heavily impacted should an ordinance go into effect. We've looked at a couple of different strategies. So we've tested out, we put out a request for quotes for ground teams, looking at people with lived experience and connection in the community that are interested in potentially hosting an event or bringing people together to help gather that input. And so we're working through that. And then thinking about how is the way that we start to target some of these grocers, some of these restaurants, and reach out to them. So we're trying to work through what a good methodology would be, recognizing that we have limited staff capacity and a limited amount of time to try and get this work done. So I believe that's all I have. So again, these are just the key takeaways. A lot of interest from folks that are already, I would say, in the converted, and low impact. And so we really need to get some more from the folks, I think, that would be heavily impacted should an ordinance go into a place. So we're looking, now that we have some data to look at, that can help focus our efforts as we think about some different engagement strategies. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Bridget. Steve.
Oh my. I read your presentation and was disheartened. for many of the reasons that you just articulated, that it was a lot of self-selection and preaching to the converted that showed up to answer these questions. On the residential side, people who are generally appear to be more well-to-do, 70 some percent bring their own bags in already. So that's limited helpfulness. And the question on the missing voices residential side is, as you say, is how to get those voices. One, as you were speaking, one thought occurred to me, for what it's worth, is with your vast staff that I know is available to do work like this, is setting up like tables outside of grocery stores or outside of other stores that they use that have plastic bags, and seeing if people are willing to stop and give you their input according to some simplified version of a survey. I don't know how practical that is, but when you see people checking out at Target, as I did this morning, they're using plastic bags right and left, and getting their input, because those are not the people who filled out these questions. And then, on the business side, you're probably, I don't know, making appointments to sit down with someone at Ingalls, or someone at wherever. I don't know what the staffing capacity is to do that, but really sort of trying to nab these people and the businesses that are really going to be affected by this, and getting some really hard feedback would be great if staffing permitted. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I think those are all, that's what we're trying to work through right now. And what we're trying to do is determine a methodology so that we're making sure that wherever we outreach to has impact across the city, because we can only go to so many places. And so how do we select where we go? What days and times do we go, to make sure that, we're getting the best results and not going just kind of haphazard based on when Bridget and Kira don't have a meeting. So that's a tough thing to do.
All right, thanks. Councilwoman Ullman, you're up.
I had a very different reaction to this data. I thought it was extremely encouraging and basically told me this is a slam dunk in the community. That's what I saw. I don't know of a single city survey that's had more responses. Is this the top, Bridget?
At the moment.
Everybody take a deep breath and pause. The runner-up I can think of is Merriman Avenue, which had nearly 5,000 and was maybe a 60-40 split on pro-con. So we just had 7,000 citizens, like 7% of our population, say, do this. From my vantage point, that is slam dunk territory for citizen support.
Kira corrected me. We might be number 2.
That's great.
Still, and it's not hotly contested. I understand that there are some voices absent. I think it's important that we get to our BIPOC communities and our low-income communities in for it. That makes a lot of sense. I understand we want to talk to the impacted businesses, but also if you came and knocked on my door and said, hey, can I regulate you? I think we know what they're going to say. So if we're seeing this much support from our communities, I'm not trying to be cavalier and I'm not trying to rush it. I just want to offer a counter perspective that I found this extremely encouraging.
Thank you for that plastic bag half full perspective. And Steve, we're going to go back to you.
Maybe I should not. I just think 7% is a big number for surveys. But I think the hard question you have to ask is, how representative is that 7% of the community, in particular, those who use and rely on single-use plastic bags? So the raw number itself, I don't think gets you there. And I think it's really important to hear from people, from everyone else.
What I'm trying to offer, though, Steve, is context that we barely have 30% voter participation. So,
But
so I,
who's-
I don't think we're going to get a significant, we're not going to get responses. Like, I just want to offer the context that, yes, this is not representative of the full community. I get that. And in a policy context, this amount of contribution, anyone who participates in a survey is the choir, whether they love the choir or they hate the choir. That's just the nature of that type of engagement. I just wanted to offer context that that was pretty overwhelming support of the people who participated in it.
Point made on, I take your point on residential. We got nothing back on business. We need to hear from those people. And I understand your point. If you're going to go up there and say, Ingalls, do you want to, how about we ban plastic bags? I don't know. I want to hear what they have to say, what the impact on costs is, what a restaurant that if you're going to tell them they can't use styrofoam, what that's going to mean for them. Maybe I'm naive, but I hope that we would be able to get some kind of meaningful ideas about what kind of impact it's going to have and take that into consideration. So that's my.
And part of that input we're looking for is to be able to understand more about where they're getting their products, so we can look at product availability, cost of, what your distribution access is, to look at, what alternatives you have where you're purchasing these materials, and if support was needed, what would it look like? Because there's no point in us designing a program to support people in a transition that they don't need, right? So figuring out who might need that support and what it would look like. So any, implementation plan that came in place was informed by those needs.
Right, we have one more hand raised, Kim.
So I just wanted to kind of add to this. I think it's really important to listen to both of the presentations, and it is encouraging. One, we know the city does not have the capacity to deal with the waste, the plastic waste. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be a solution there where the city can take this on. Also, there's large support for a change. Yes, and I do see the plastic bag half full approach. We would love to hear from more people. I think engagement from the citizens, I think overall, every department would like to have more engagement from our citizens. It's a big change, but I think like anything, the use of plastic bags has become more of a habit, and that habit needs to change. It should not be automatic. You're at the grocery store and your bag's double bagged every item and puts 3 things in that bag. So, it's a matter of changing habits and getting people to look at things differently. This isn't going to happen overnight. There are going to be a lot of people pissed off, but there's also going to be a lot of people that are really happy. So I think the presentation that both Bridget and Jess put together today really shows us that we have an issue that we have to address, and that we have a good amount of support for making a change. I commend both of you and Maggie for your work prior as well. This is not easy, and it's definitely not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's great. I think the biggest thing we can do is just continue to try and find more voices, but at some point we have to say, we have collected the data, we now have to move forward, and what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, we're running about 30 minutes behind, and Steve, I don't know if you have a quick comment before we bag this up. Yep.
Yeah, just quick question. What's the timeline for going forward on this? You're going to seek to gather additional input, and then there will be a recommendation. How long? Oh, did I miss it? I'm sorry. Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
And this is going to the Environment and Safety Committee, Council Committee at their next meeting. Jess and I's presentations. FYI.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to new business. And first up is Asheville Buncombe Food Policy Council contract activity update with Gina Smith. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. Thanks for having me. And I have a presentation. Kira, are you going to do the slideshow?
I'm in.
Oh, Bridget's got it. Awesome. So you can move to the next slide. So just a little background about the Food Policy Council really quickly. We did form in 2011. So we've been around for a while, and we continue to be made up of community members and representatives of nonprofits, neighborhood leaders. We have a broad range of folks who participate. And our mission is to identify, propose, and advocate for policies, et cetera, to improve and protect our local food system. Next slide, Bridget. So just a few highlights of the past fiscal year. We have been, for the past 3 years, part of the leadership for the Western North Carolina Food Justice Planning Initiative, which is working in several strategy areas over 18 counties in Western North Carolina on food justice. And that group is moving towards forming a 501c3, the WNC Food Systems Coalition. So that's been a really exciting thing we've been working on. We're also continuing to provide leadership for the Food Waste Solutions WNC Coalition, which is a group of organizations from all over the Western North Carolina region who lots of different folks are part of this group, UNCA, Waste Reduction Partners, the city, for example. And we do a lot of educational work in the community around food waste reduction. We also have been continuing to partner with 2 neighborhoods in Asheville, East and Valley Street, which is a legacy historically Black neighborhood, and Riverview, which is a public housing neighborhood in West Asheville, on neighborhood emergency food preparedness planning projects. And both of those are moving at different rates, but they're both moving ahead really well right now. So that's exciting too. And we are continuing to work with the city's Office of Sustainability and the IT department to refresh the Asheville Edibles map on a new platform. So we are getting to the stage of being able to launch that soon. There are 4 action items for this past year's contract. And the first one is to do this report for the Sustainable Advisory Committee. The next one is in coordination with the Climate Justice Initiative to expand and implement the action items for our neighborhood emergency food plans. We also, like I mentioned, are contracting along with Bountiful Cities to finalize and support the transition of the edibles map to a new platform. And the 4th is supporting Food Waste Solutions WNC in pursuing its activities relevant to resource recovery focus area of the Food Policy Action Plan. So the deliverables for those action items I'll get into now. The first is this report, so I can check that one off. Second is the neighborhood emergency food preparedness plans. We've been collaborating, like I said, with those 2 neighborhoods. With East and Valley Street, we have finalized with them their emergency food preparedness plan, and they have drafted an implementation plan. And at their last meeting in April, they did choose a new neighborhood project leader to lead the implementation phase. Her name is Sharon Green. And through funding that we have secured from the Community Foundation, we're able to offer Sharon some compensation for her time in doing this, which is great. With Riverview, they have completed their neighborhood input surveys, and they have developed a draft neighborhood emergency food plan. And so they're going to continue to gather a little more input on the draft plan, finalize it, and then work on looking at prioritizing some action items. And the photo I have there is a group of Masters of Public Health students that we worked with this spring. They supported us with working with both of these neighborhoods. They were from the UNCA Gillings Masters of Public Health program, and they were awesome. The next steps for these neighborhoods are, like I said, working with Sharon Green. We're going to support Sharon and the Neighborhood Association to begin pursuing their plan implementation. Right now, Sharon is pulling together a committee to work on this. And in D Review, like I said, we're gathering the input, continuing to gather input on the draft plan and finalize and working with the two neighborhood leaders we have in D Review to develop their implementation plan. And in general, we just want to work with both neighborhoods to support them in identifying potential areas for policy advocacy around this work. And also, I wanted to mention, in the past with our city deliverables, we've had these outdoor pantries have been part of that. They weren't this year, but we've continued that work because they've been very popular. We've secured other funding streams to support that. We now have 5 pantries in 4 different neighborhoods in Asheville. We have them in Shiloh, Easton, Valley Street, Deaver View, and South Side. And the most recent one went in at Grant Center, and the artist Cleaster Cotton and her youth artists are painting that as we speak. They do it on Wednesdays, and they should be finishing soon. And there's going to be a pantry kit project happening at the Weekend Community Garden. We've transitioned from having a contractor go out and build the pantries to putting together kits that the communities can find volunteers to assemble themselves. Another thing that has come out of our neighborhood emergency food preparedness work is recognition of the need that these communities have mentioned the need for community refrigeration. So we have a Buncombe County tipping point grant this year that is supporting us working with the city of Asheville to look at developing policy around community refrigeration. Oakley and Shiloh are both neighborhoods that we've been in conversations with about this, and they're both very interested in having community refrigeration. And the photo is just a group in Atlanta that I've been talking with about their community refrigeration efforts. And this Action C is the Asheville Edibles map. So the Food Policy Council has been working with the city for the past 2 years on changes to the map. And we are getting to the point when we launch, the Food Policy Council is going to support promoting that launch. And then it's going to transition to Bountiful Cities, who will be maintaining the map. And so Bountiful Cities is also coordinating with the City of Asheville Office of Sustainability and IT on developing a plan for data management and systems updates and maintenance. In Food Waste Solutions, we do quarterly leadership meetings. We have several working groups in our Food Waste Solutions group, and the Food Policy Council supports their convenings. We also do quarterly networking, public-facing networking meetings where we invite folks out to participate and do educational activities and networking. This is a photo of Kira at one of our quarterly networking events that was at Wedge Brewing in August. We tend to have really good turnouts for these events. We usually have around 30 to 40 folks who come out. And usually we have lots of new people in the mix, which is great. We also have a lot of community partners who like to be involved. The WNC Farmers Market has been involved in these. We have businesses like DJ's Pickles who come out and do demos. They're really fun. So April was Food Waste Reduction Month in Asheville, as you probably know, and the Food Policy Council supports Food Waste Solutions with that social media campaign that we do all month long. And also, since last year, we've been doing the Taste It, Don't Waste It Asheville Chefs Challenge to sort of cap off Food Waste Reduction Month. That's an in-person culinary event, also super fun. It serves as one of our quarterly networking events. And this year we had over 100 people come out. We had 4 chefs competing. Guests got to all taste all the food and vote for their favorite chef. And the next thing on the agenda for Food Waste Solutions is we're currently planning the third WNC Food Waste Solutions Summit, which is happening November 9th at AB Tech. And that's all I have. I'm ready for questions. Or did you want to wait and do questions after Bountiful Cities speaks?
If there are two separate initiatives, maybe we could take your questions first, Gina, and thank you for a great presentation. And Austin left. Alicia.
It's great to hear your update. I was just wondering if you're working with other like interfaith initiatives. Because I know I volunteer at Community Garden in the county, and we donate 80% of our food to churches that run food pantries and do have refrigeration. And so I'm just wondering, has there been that collaboration maybe with other, besides businesses like interfaith partners?
With churches. Particularly with our community refrigeration, I've been having conversations with churches, and we do have churches participating in some capacities in different ways. St. James Church in East End has been a partner for a few years now. They actually maintain one of the pantries right in front of their church. So we do, yes, periodically have partnerships with churches. It just depends on what project we're working on.
Ashley?
Sounds like you guys are doing some really awesome stuff. I was curious if the edible map that you are doing with Bountiful Cities, if it also has information on the plant, like, identification, when to pick. I mean, I just can't tell you how many times I've seen people standing around a mulberry or a pawpaw and going, what is this? Doesn't
Yeah, there's all kinds of information about the different plants that's provided. There's different layers to the map, and there's like you can look at different things. So I don't know if you're familiar with the previous map. This has some more bells and whistles, and I think it's a little more visually appealing and interactive. And we're changing. I don't know if Kate's going to be speaking about this. She might elaborate about this in her presentation. But we're changing the way that the community can input their information, so it's still crowdsourced. But instead of just putting it directly in to the map platform, people are going to be going through the Bountiful Cities website, I believe, to put in their information. And there will be some folks with the Community Garden Network who are going to be taking that information and checking it and doing a little bit of work around that. So it's not just going directly to the map now.
Great. If there are no other questions, thank you, Gina. I'm a big fan. I used to volunteer with the Food Policy Council back in the early days with Kiara and before that, and glad you're keeping it alive.
Thank you.
So with that, we will turn it over to Kate and Bountiful Cities.
I'm going to say hello, and then I'm going to turn my camera off because I have to be on my phone because my computer won't let me use sound right now. So I'm going to put my phone down. Before I get started, I will say, as far as the map goes, if you hover over, when you get on the map, you hover over the dot or click on it, it will say like serviceberry, here's when you can harvest it, and here's what you can use it for, and all of that information. Some of that is going to be input by us, but some of it could be input just by the community. So there we'll have to have some sort of like check on that to make sure that it's like Wikipedia, you're like, this is entered by somebody else, and we have to double check to make sure that it's clear. So we're still working out all of the details on that, but it should have some of that with pictures and location and all of those things. So I'm Kate Justin with Bountiful Cities, and we do work in Asheville and Buncombe County with urban agriculture, big picture. Our specific work with the city of Asheville is with the Food Policy Council and with the Community Garden Network. And you can go to the next slide. In our current contract, we have 3 areas that we're working. The first one is to support the maintenance of the edible parks. The edible parks are it's like the edible forest. So it's the trees, edible parks. The second one is to work on activities with the city that really focus on food production and increasing getting fresh food out to people in the community. And then the third piece is supporting the Asheville Edibles program. The Asheville Edibles program is more of like the community gardens that are on city-owned land. So we have the food forests and the community gardens that grow like annuals and perennial food. Also supporting the neighborhood emergency food plan activities, infrastructure, and signage. So it's getting stuff, buying supplies, helping them to get the things that they need to implement their plan. So you can go to the next slide. And this is just some of the highlights of what we have been doing. We help host 20 community work days at the edible parks. That's George Washington Carver over at Tempe Avery, and then the West Asheville Edible Park. That focuses on tree maintenance, making sure invasives are removed, looking at how those trees are doing, that they don't have disease, what kinds of additional support we would need to bring in if there's something going on with any of the trees that are fruit or food producing. We are piloting doing some educational workshops along with the work days at Tempe Avery and working with the youth that is there for after school programming. And that's been going pretty well. We have another one tomorrow. They're going to be planting a salsa garden in the gardens that are underneath I think it's service berries that are planted there. The George Washington Carver Park was featured in a Washington Post article about food forests throughout the U.S. So that was pretty cool. And then we've been working really closely with the folks at Stevens Lee East End Valley Neighborhood Association to figure out what to do about the tree canopy over at George Washington Carver. It's a very large and established green space. And so some of the bigger trees are now casting too much shade over the smaller fruit-bearing trees that are underneath them. And some of the fruit-bearing trees are getting really large as well. And so we have to have other folks be able to come in to take care of those. It's not something that we can do during a volunteer work day because we don't actually have the equipment that's needed to do arbor care like that. But that's been going really well to figure out how to move that forward. And then we've been continuing to make signs and install signs on the trees. So when folks walk through the edible forest, when they're looking around and they're saying, oh, I wonder what this is, there's a sign there that says, this is a walnut tree and this is an apple tree or whatever. You can go to the next slide, and I have some photos. The George Washington Carver Park, we have monthly work days. It's been the fourth Friday of every month. They're moving it to the third Friday moving forward. And they have a great group of people that come out pretty regularly. There's a pretty large group of folks. And you can just go through, there's just a few pictures on here. And like I said, they are doing a lot of the just general maintenance in the area. We're working on getting them their own tools so they have what they need. They are organizing themselves. They, plan all of the things, and we just serve as a support for them and guidance and helping them if they're like, do I pull this or do I leave it? Is this edible or is this a weed? And so that has been really great with them. And that's just more pictures of George Washington Carver. And then the Stevens Lee Community Garden is also at that same location. I'll talk about that in just a minute, but they have put in some raised beds and have some annuals planted that the community is able to use and eat from those spaces as well. The next picture has a little up close of the garden beds and what they're growing in there. And this is located, if you see on the picture on the right behind that tree where that shed is, that's one of the compost drop-off sites as well that y'all were talking about earlier. And then the next few slides are of the West Asheville Park and Community Garden. This was right after they did mulching at the West Asheville community, or for the food forest there. If you look to the right, they have installed a spigot so they can actually water things now and not just depend on hopefully getting rain whenever we get it. And then the next picture has the community gardens that were installed and the season extension that was used this past winter to try to get some of the greens to stay a little bit longer down there. And they have a really great group of folks who are doing most of the work. Again, we work with them and serve as guidance and help and support and connecting them with other resources when they need things. So the second piece that we're working on is within the Community Garden Network. You can go to the next slide. And through that, we do monthly newsletters that have educational information and events and community connection stuff in there that goes out to the Community Garden Network listserv. Folks can also use that listserv to put out needs or to say, I have extra things. So like I have, 2 flats of extra tomatoes, who would like them? Or I need compost. Does anybody have extra? I only need, X amount or something like that. So it's a great way for community gardens to communicate with each other. And then we moderate that. So if something's put out there, nobody answers, then we can look into it and say, hey, why don't you connect with this person? Because I know they have a need for tomatoes. They just didn't see this email. We also do educational workshops. We are doing them all in person again, which is great because doing virtual gardening workshops is not really exciting for most people. And those workshops are about a variety of things. Sometimes it is about, cooking food, what to do with it, how to harvest things. Sometimes it's about maintenance and care, planning for gardening and how to work in a community garden. And then we also do networking activities as well, where we'll have a short workshop and then afterwards a potluck where folks can just sit and talk to each other and kind of brainstorm what they're doing in their gardens. A big push this past year was on season extension materials. And part of that is because they get used and sometimes destroyed. So for example, we had a little hoop house at one of the gardens and a bear just walked through it. And there's really not much you can do about that because they're going to break the poles and rip through the plastic. And, we can try to mend it and reuse things, but we end up having to replace a lot of that stuff when things like that happen. So the next couple of pictures are just of our workshops. And the workshops are hosted in different community gardens around Asheville. Sometimes they're on city property. Sometimes they're in some of the privately owned community gardens or gardens that are on private land. And it just depends on the workshop and the facilitator. The next picture has 3 different varieties. One was a cooking demonstration that was done outside. Second one, I think that was at Stevens Lee. So there was an actual slideshow presentation that was done. And then the last one was this winter, and it was working with Asheville Tool Library. So they hosted it, and then we brought folks out to work with them as well, where they could actually help repair folks' tools, which was really great. The next picture is just our Community Garden Network newsletter that goes out every month. We do it in English and Spanish right now. And we work with several gardens who are primarily Spanish speaking and make sure that we have ways to connect folks with each other that way as well. And the last part of this is I've already spoken about some of this with those previous pictures. That, you know, we do have some really great leaders who are doing some work, but we've also had some turnover in leadership. So, you know, that's one of the hard things with community gardens is that it's folks who live there and have time and capacity, but then that changes sometimes. And so then you have a brand new person who comes in, which is great because there's new ideas and new energy and new excitement, but also then there's this need for someone to be there that has the story. And so we serve as that person. So we are able to say, hey, this is why the Murray Hill Garden was started, what's been happening, where do y'all want to take it, and how are you going to move this forward? Several of the gardens were on the Urban Garden Tour last summer, and we have more that are going to be on the Urban Garden Tour this coming year. I had already mentioned the water spigot at West Asheville. And we're just doing a lot of help in planning right now. That seems to be the biggest problem, is that a lot of the stuff and even the things that y'all have been talking about before is having for individuals and for community to have capacity for this stuff. They just need support and somebody to talk through it with. So if they're talking through, you know, well, I want to plant all of these varieties. And then we'll say, well, that's really great, but your garden bed is only, you know, it's only 1/4 of an acre. And so how much can you feasibly produce there? And then we can help them to break that out and look at budget and all of those things. And then if you want to go through the last couple of pictures, there's the West Asheville Park and Community Garden. That's an example of one of the signs that we made that has a lot more information. Some of the signs that we make are just identification signs, but some of them can have more information. And then they built a little cover over it as well. So we can hopefully have it last a little bit longer. And then the picture on the right is of Elder and Sage, which is downtown. And that's also Elder and Sage. And then the final one is down at West Asheville again. That's one of their work days and community engagement things where they all came down and painted the garden beds. So that is it. So questions?
Thank you very much, Kate. That was excellent, inspiring. And we do have a question from Joel Osgood.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Big fan of the work that you do. I just had one question. I know maybe 10, 12 years ago, y'all were having some issues with Parks and Rec and a maintenance issue with establishing plants and communication with City Parks and Rec. Has that all been resolved? Is there anything that y'all have as sort of issues or hindrances in terms of communication with the city, or just from a maintenance standpoint?
Yeah. I will say that any communication issues that happen with any maintenance, it's not specific to the city. It happens kind of everywhere. We work with schools, school gardens as well, and there's just turnover. So usually it's very unintentional issues. And we work really hard to have ongoing communication and to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. And sometimes a new person comes in and then mows over the entire herb garden. And they just didn't know. They're not intentionally trying to like destroy anything. But that just happened at Lucy S. Herring a month ago, where there were like signs that were like pollinator garden and work with the bees. It's like an educational garden and there's all this stuff. And we came in on Monday and it was like completely leveled. Like they mowed and it was, it was inside rocks, and it came back and it looks beautiful. There's flowers again. And nobody, it was not ill intent. And it happens all the time. So yes, it happened 11 years ago. It happened last year. It happened last month. It will happen again. And we have to keep just working with folks. And it's, it happens it happens in neighborhoods too. So it's not, it's just the bigger folks that are just not paying attention, but they just don't know. And so there's a big piece of education and communication. We are really trying to work hard with Parks and Rec to be engaged in, like, we're having this event at your place, we're doing this thing at the West Asheville Park. Here we are again at the West Asheville Park. We're going to be here again at Stevens Lee, so we're doing that a lot more.
Yeah, great. Repetition definitely helps. We'll get to know. I was also just curious what your sort of 5 to 10 year vision is for Bountiful Cities, and if there's anything that we with the SAC can do to support you all.
I will say that our current push right now is to work to support the neighborhoods. I think that we've seen a lot of folks stepping into neighborhoods and doing things for them, or creating dependency on ourselves for that. Like, well, we can't do this unless Bountiful Cities is here, because they know. They're the ones who know, and we don't know. We'd like to give them the knowledge and give them the information, give them the tools, and say, you all actually can do this, and we're here to support you. It's your garden, it's your space. What do you need? So that could take a year or 5 or 10. With each community, it's different. And Gina spoke to that in, East End Valley neighborhood. There's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of people doing stuff. In the Deaverview neighborhood, it's a little bit harder. And part of that is because of capacity. And we find that in the school gardens, we find that in the community gardens, where, one school, their PTO is real strong. They have a lot of buy-in and support, and the other one, they're just dealing with a lot of other issues. And I think that is, even listening to the plastic conversation, the reason that you're not getting information maybe from some folks is they're like, yeah, it's a big deal. And also, I don't have time for that right now. I need to figure out how to feed my family or get to work. I don't have transportation. I don't have new shoes. Like, the other things are a much bigger problem in their forefront vision, that it's not that, growing food is not important to them, but it's just easier to go to buy something that's already made right now because they just don't have capacity for it. So, it's working with everybody wherever they're at. And it's an entirely slow process. And I think that the hard part with a presentation like this is I'm like, look, they painted all the benches. That's a huge accomplishment. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just telling them they painted the benches. That doesn't sound like that big of a deal. So I think that there's a lot of growth and work that's being done. And also there's a lot to still do. It's a big city. And
Absolutely.
It's not,
Yeah, well, so thankful. I really believe that the issue with the Food Policy Council and the work that you're doing with food insecurity is only going to increase in our city with time. And, as our city becomes a spot on the map for climate resiliency, and people are moving here and want to live here because of issues in other cities and other communities, this access to good, healthy food is a critical piece to that.
Yeah.
And with lack of potential resources on the horizon, we're going to be in a scenario, maybe 50 or 60 harvests where, or years, harvest years, where we're not going to have access to transportation to bring in food from Ecuador and Mexico, and it's going to be important to be able to grow it here. So I appreciate everything that y'all are doing. It's amazing.
Thank you. And I will say one other thing with that. There is one of the other things that we're really focusing on with folks is the feeling like it's okay to eat food off of public land or city-owned land. There's this barrier that exists where people who are used to being able to walk through a public space and kind of do what they want are like, oh, I can pick this apple and eat it. Where other folks are used to being questioned about what they're doing there or why they're taking it or have to explain or justify themselves. And they're going to walk right by the apple. They might look at it and be like, oh, I really want to pick that apple, but that's not for me. That I can't take that because that is on their land and that's not my land. So we're working on that as well, is like changing that perception. And that's a hard one because that is like an ingrained piece in some folks that it is the only land that's mine has been taken away or has never been owned by someone like me. I don't own anything. I rent. I'm transient, whatever it is. And so there's that piece that sometimes the people who need the food the most will pass it by. And those of us who do have access and feel safe grabbing that apple will. So that's another one of the focus areas. That's not a deliverable. I don't know how to report on that. You know, it's like how many people like more fresh vegetables because of this. I don't know. It's self-reported. It's really hard to get that information, but that is a focus right now as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well stated, and we appreciate your passion. And looks like we're on a sinking ship, and we're losing passengers here.
It is 5:30.
5:30. I know we covered old business and then new business, and there's no middle business. I guess the middle is missing again. So with that, we're going to go to public comment. Is there any public comment, Bridget or Kiara?
There are no people in the speaker queue.
And we did not receive any written comments either.
Okay, so that comment, the email from Mr. McKinley was
That was the only one.
okay. And does it need to be presented today, or I guess we've responded?
You can read it if you'd like to.
I don't have it in front of me at the moment. It's fairly long too. Do you have it in front of you, Britt? I just wasn't sure of the protocol.
I'll link it in the agenda in the meeting minutes so that people can have it available for the future. How about that?
Okay.
That's what I usually do.
All right, that's fine. And yes, we did get one comment regarding composting, and Steve alluded to it earlier. So I don't know if there's anything else that we need to cover, but if not, you're all doing excellent work. Thank you. I'm honored to be in this meeting with you. Any other comments?
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Maggie.
Thanks, everybody. Tim, I appreciate your comedic relief. You got quick wit. It's fun.
and I only show about 10% of it. Most of it is ongoing in my head.
Beast.
All right.